We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary. The smirk on his face was the last thing I saw before he terminated me. Nothing personal, just cost-cutting. My name is Victor Hale, and at 55 I was the lead systems engineer at Veltria Housing. For 18 years, I had built their entire infrastructure from the ground up, architected every expansion, and kept everything running so smoothly that the executives forgot how much they depended on me, till they decided they couldn't afford me anymore. I sat across from Graham Vickers, the new chief technology officer. He had been with the company for only 6 months, a 42-year-old with designer glasses and an MBA from Cornell. He was brought in to modernize operations, which apparently meant firing the most experienced staff first. The severance package is generous, said Diane from Human Resources, sliding a folder across the table. 2 months' salary, plus your accrued vacation time. I nodded, took the folder, and said, "Thank you. Is that all you have to say?" Graham looked almost disappointed. Maybe he expected me to argue or threaten a lawsuit, giving him a story to tell the board about how difficult I was being. "What would you like me to say?" "Most people in your position have questions, concerns," he said. I shrugged. "Seems pretty straightforward to me." Graham exchanged glances with Diane, who looked just as perplexed by my calm. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't calm. I was simply done. There's a difference. "Well, we'd appreciate your help with the transition," Graham continued. "The new engineering team will need some guidance on the system architecture, perhaps a consulting arrangement for a few weeks." "I'll think about it," I said, knowing I wouldn't. We shook hands. I cleared out my desk without a fuss. 18 years of work fit into a single cardboard box. I gave a quick nod to a few colleagues, who looked away awkwardly, afraid the same fate awaited them. As I walked to my truck in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. A text from Alan, the database administrator I'd hired 12 years ago. "The whole team's freaking out." I didn't respond. At home, I sat on my deck overlooking Lake Ontario, nursing a glass of bourbon. The sunset painted the water a deep copper. My wife, Elaine, placed a hand on my shoulder. "What will you do now?" I shrugged. "Something will turn up." What Graham didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that I hadn't just built their systems. I had custom-coded large sections myself, with minimal documentation because the company had always refused to fund a proper documentation team. Only I understood the deep redundancies, the hidden security layers, and the intricate network architecture. And I wasn't planning to explain it to anyone now. I'd started at Veltria Housing when it was a small real estate management firm called Bayview Properties. It had 4 apartment complexes, a dozen employees, 2 desktop computers, a fax machine, and dial-up internet. The owner, Harold Bay, hired me away from a consulting gig in Syracuse. "We're expanding," he told me. "Need someone who can build us something solid." Over 18 years, I had transformed that rudimentary setup into an integrated property management system. It handled everything from tenant applications and background checks to automated maintenance requests and rent collection for 63 properties across 4 states. I built it piece by piece, adapting and refining it as the company grew. When Harold retired 5 years ago, his son Justin sold the company to a private equity firm that rebranded it as Veltria Housing. They kept me on, impressed by what I'd built. But things started to change. New executives meant new priorities. Quarterly targets became more important than long-term stability. The warning signs came gradually. First, they rejected my proposal. "For a documentation team, too expensive," they said. "We'll get to it next quarter." The quarter never came. Then, they brought in consultants, young MBA types, who talked about disrupting property management and leveraging cloud solutions. They'd sit through my explanations with glazed eyes, then recommend generic, off-the-shelf solutions that wouldn't integrate with our custom infrastructure. I kept pushing back, explaining why their approach wouldn't work. Eventually, they stopped inviting me to planning meetings. Lane noticed it before I did. "They're pushing you out," she said one night over dinner. "You need to prepare." I brushed her off. They need me. No one else understands how the whole system works. "That might be exactly the problem," she replied. 6 months ago, They hired Graham as the new CTO. He came from a banking software company and immediately started talking about standardization and legacy system replacement. He hired 3 junior engineers fresh out of college, had them shadowing me and asking questions. I answered their questions, but I knew they weren't grasping the complexities. How could they? It had taken me years to build those systems, to understand the interdependencies, and to create the redundancies that kept everything running smoothly. Last week, Graham stopped by my office. "Quick meeting tomorrow morning," he said casually. "Just a quarterly check-in. I should have seen it coming." The first call came 2 weeks after my termination. I was in my home office, updating my resume, when my phone rang. Graham Vickers. I let it go to voicemail. "Victor, it's Graham. Having some issues with the tenant portal. The junior team is working on it, but they're having trouble understanding some of your code. Could you call us back? It would just be a quick consultation." I deleted the message and went back to my resume. 3 more calls came that day, each voicemail sounding increasingly desperate. By evening, Alan texted me. "System's been down. All day, maintenance requests aren't processing. Graham's losing his mind." The next morning, Diane from HR called. "Victor, I hope you're doing well. I'm calling because we'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement, just temporary, to help with some current system issues. The compensation would be quite generous." I picked up the phone. How generous? $300 an hour, minimum 4-hour engagement. "I'll think about it and get back to you," I said, then hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the lake. Elaine placed a cup of coffee in front of me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they're finding out exactly what I'm worth." Over the next 3 days, the calls increased. Graham, Diane, even Justin Bayou, who was still on the board. The tenant portal was down. The maintenance scheduling system was throwing errors. And the automatic payment processing had failed, affecting thousands of residents. I didn't respond to any of them. On day 4, an email arrived from Devlin Systems, a regional competitor to Veltria. It was from their director of technology, Lawrence Devlin himself. "Victor, I heard about your situation at Veltria. We've always admired your work from afar. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities with us? We're looking to upgrade our entire property management infrastructure." I replied and set up a meeting for the next day. That evening, as Elaine and I were making dinner, my doorbell rang. Graham Vickers stood on my porch. His designer glasses were slightly askew, his normally immaculate suit wrinkled. "Victor, I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but we have an emergency. The entire system is down. Nothing is working. The team can't figure out what's wrong." I leaned against the doorframe. "That sounds serious." "It is. We need your help. The board has authorized me to offer you a substantial consulting fee. $500 an hour. Whatever it takes." I thought about the cardboard box in my garage, 18 years of work reduced to a few mementos. I thought about nothing personal, just cost-cutting. I thought about the documentation team they'd never approved. "I'm sorry to hear about your troubles," I said quietly, "but I have an interview tomorrow. Something will turn up just like I thought." I closed the door on his stunned face and went back to dinner. For the first time since my termination, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just clarity. It wasn't going to help them fix what they'd broken. The interview with Lawrence Devlin went better than expected. "I've followed your work for years," he said, stirring his coffee. "That integrated property management system you've built at Veltria is legendary in our industry. Nobody has anything close to it." "Thank you," I said. "It took time, but I want to talk about. We're looking to build something similar. But we need someone who understands architecture and integration points. Someone who can build us something better than what's out there." "I'm interested," I said. Lawrence smiled. "Good, because I'm prepared to offer you the position of Chief Systems Architect. Full benefits, stock options, and a salary 20% higher than what you were making at Veltria." It was a good offer, almost too good. "Why me?" I asked. "There are younger engineers out there, cheaper ones." Lawrence laughed. "You sound like your former employer. You tried that route." Hired 3 bright young engineers from top schools. They built us something sleek and modern that crashes every time we get more than 100 simultaneous users. We don't need cheap. We need reliable. I accepted the offer the next day. Meanwhile, Veltria's problems were escalating and kept me updated through occasional texts. A week after I started at Devlin, Graham called again. "Victor, please, this is getting serious. We've lost access to payment records for the past 3 months. The consulting team says they need your input on the database structure." I was tempted to ignore it, but something made me pick up. "Graham, I'm employed elsewhere now. Exclusive contract. I'm afraid I can't help you. We'll double whatever. They're paying you for just 2 days of your time. It's not about the money." "Then what is it about?" Revenge. "Are you enjoying watching us struggle?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "No, Graham, I'm not enjoying it. But you made a business decision. You decided my experience wasn't worth the cost. Now you're discovering what that actually means. The board wants to discuss bringing you back. Full salary, plus a signing bonus." For a moment I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it quickly faded. Going back would solve nothing. The same executives who decided I was expendable would be waiting for the next opportunity to cut costs. "I appreciate the offer, but I've made a commitment to Devlin Systems." Graham's voice hardened. There could be legal implications. "If we discover you intentionally made our systems difficult to maintain, non-compete clauses, intellectual property concerns." There it was. The threat I'd been expecting. "The system is exactly as it was when the company repeatedly denied my requests for a documentation team," I replied evenly. "Every line of code belongs to Veltria, as specified in my employment contract. I've taken nothing with me except my experience, but feel free to have your lawyers contact mine." I hung up, my hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from an anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. The accusation that I'd somehow sabotaged them was the final insult. At Devlin, I was starting fresh, building systems properly. From the ground up, with full documentation and training programs for the engineering team, I wasn't going to look back. A month later, Alan showed up at my new office. "Got time for lunch?" he asked. Over sandwiches, he filled me in on the chaos at Veltria. "It's worse than you think," he said, lowering his voice. "They've lost access to historical data going back 3 years. The backup systems are corrupted. The consulting firm is saying they might need to rebuild from scratch." I wasn't surprised. The backup system had multiple redundancies and security protocols that needed to be followed precisely. Skip one step, and the entire process would fail. "That's not all," Alan continued. "I found something when I was trying to help the consultants. Graham had been planning your termination for months. He'd been meeting with the board, convincing them that your custom infrastructure was too complex and expensive to maintain. He pulled out his laptop and showed me emails he had discovered in the system, archives emails between Graham and the board discussing a legacy staff reduction plan, naming me as the first target. He told them they could replace you with cheaper engineers and transition to off-the-shelf solutions within 6 months. He projected cost savings of over $1 million annually. I read through the emails, feeling a strange detachment. One line from Graham stood out. "Hale's custom systems are unnecessarily complex. He's made himself indispensable by design, not necessity." "There's more," Alan said. "The private equity firm that owns Veltria is planning to sell." Graham was brought in specifically to cut costs and make the company look more profitable before the sale. Now it all made sense. The push for standardization, resistance to proper documentation, the sudden focus on reducing senior staff costs. It wasn't about improving the company. It was about dressing it up for a quick flip. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Alan closed his laptop. "Because I quit yesterday, and I'm not the only one. Half the IT department is left. The consultants are estimating at least 6 months to restore full functionality." He hesitated. "And because Veltria's biggest client, Westbrook Properties, is considering jumping ship, they've lost faith in the management system?" I thought about the implications. Westbrook represented nearly 30% of Veltria's revenue. Losing them would be devastating, especially with a sale pending. What will you do now? I asked. Alan grinned. Actually, I was hoping Devlin might be hiring database administrators. Later that afternoon, I spoke with Lawrence, who agreed to bring Alan on board immediately. 2 months into my role at Devlin, Lawrence called me into his office. I just got off the phone with Jeffrey Westbrook, he said, referring to the CEO of Westbrook Properties. They're officially terminating their contract with Veltria next month. They want to know if we can handle their portfolio. Westbrook Properties managed over 10,000 units across the Northeast. It would more than double Devlin's current operations. We're not ready for that kind of scale, I admitted. The new system is coming along, but it's only halfway there. Lawrence leaned forward. What would it take to get ready? Jeffrey's desperate. He's willing to give us 12 weeks and fund the infrastructure expansion. This was the moment. Turning point. If Devlin took on Westbrook and succeeded, it would establish us as a serious competitor. If we failed, it could sink both companies. Let me think about the architecture, I said. I'll drop a plan by tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. Sketched system diagrams, mapped data migration pathways, and considered scaling challenges. By morning, I had a plan ambitious, but achievable. A hybrid approach that would let us onboard Westbrook's properties in stages, minimizing disruption. When I presented it to Lawrence, he studied it carefully. This is solid, he said finally. But I notice you've included a substantial documentation phase that adds 3 weeks to the timeline. It's non-negotiable, I replied. That's where Veltria failed. We document everything from day one. We train the team on every component. No single points of failure. Lawrence nodded. I'll take your word for it. Let's move forward. Next weeks were intense. We hired 5 more engineers, including 2 who had recently left Veltria. Alan built a database migration tool that could translate Veltria's data structure into our new system. I designed a modular architecture that could scale with Westbrook's needs. 10 weeks into our 12-week timeline, we were ready for a staged rollout. The day before the migration, Lawrence called me into his office again. A familiar face was waiting. Jeffrey Westbrook himself. So, you're the system architect? Jeffrey said, standing to shake my hand. Lawrence has told me a lot about you. He says you've built us something that won't break down every time we add a new property, something that will grow with us. That's the plan, I said. I also hear you used to work for Veltria. I nodded, unsure where he was going. They're in trouble, you know. The private equity firm is trying to sell, but with Westbrook leaving and their systems still not fully functional, they're not finding many interested buyers. Except one. Who's that? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Devlin Systems, Lawrence said. We're considering making an offer at a substantial discount to what they were valued at 6 months ago. I looked between them, processing the implications. The system I'd built, the people I'd trained, the company that had discarded my Al potentially coming back under my direction. Are you asking if I'd be willing to work on that? Clarified? Lawrence nodded. Only if the acquisition goes through, and only if you're comfortable with it. I thought about the irony. I'd be willing, I said finally. But I have one condition. We do it right. Full documentation, proper training, no shortcuts. Agreed, Lawrence said. We've learned that lesson. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of what had once been Veltria Housing's headquarters. The sign now read Devlin Integrated Property Management. The acquisition had gone through for less than a quarter of what the company had been valued at before my departure. Lawrence and I walked through the office, greeting former Veltria employees who would be staying on through the transition. Looked away awkwardly. Others smiled with relief. A few, those who had worked closely with me over the years, nodded with quiet understanding. Graham was gone, along with most of the executive team that had approved my termination. Justin Bayou had stayed on as a consultant, helping ease the transition with legacy clients. When we reached the server room, my old domain paused. Through the glass, I could see the hardware I'd specified, the blinking lights of systems I'd designed. Want to go in? Lawrence asked. No need, I replied. We'll be migrating everything to the new infrastructure anyway. In the main conference room, Lawrence introduced me as the Chief Integration Officer, who would be overseeing the technical transition. Many of you already know Victor, he said. He built the original systems that ran this company for nearly 2 decades. Now he'll be guiding us through the integration of both companies' technologies into something better than either had before. As I looked out at the faces, some familiar, some new, I felt no triumph, no desire to say, "I told you." So, instead I spoke briefly about the transition plan, emphasizing that no one would be left behind due to cost-cutting measures. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 1 year after the acquisition, Devlin Integrated Property Management had become the largest property management company in the Northeast. On a crisp autumn morning, I drove to the office for a final meeting with Lawrence. The leaves along Lake Ontario had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, fitting backdrop for the conclusion of this chapter. "The board approved your proposal," Lawrence said, as soon as I sat down. "The Technical Education Division will launch next quarter. You'll have full autonomy to design the curriculum and hire instructors." This had been my condition for staying. After the integration was complete, not a higher title or more money, but the creation of a division dedicated to training the next generation of engineers, teaching them not just how to code, but how to build things meant to last. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "No, thank you," Lawrence replied. "What you've built here is remarkable. Not just the technology, but the culture around it. The documentation, the knowledge sharing, the emphasis on quality over quick fixes." Later that afternoon, I cleared out my integration office. Unlike my hasty exit from Veltria, this was a planned transition to my new role. As I packed, Justin Bayou knocked on the door. "Got a minute?" he asked. We walked to the small courtyard outside the building. "My father asked about you," he said. "He always said letting you go would be the biggest mistake this company could make. Turns out he was right." "I learned something from all this," Justin continued. "Value isn't always visible until it's gone." As I drove home along the lakeshore, I thought about value, of experience, of care taken, of doing things right the first time. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't needed to. I had simply moved forward, building something better, something that would outlast any individual decision or short-term thinking. Sometimes, the best response to being undervalued is simply to prove your worth elsewhere and let the results speak for themselves.